How
Hey,
are you?
Trae. So good to see you
You,
again.
you too. Thanks for coming
Yeah,
on.
thanks for having me.
It's a nice, cool Friday.
Yeah,
But
chill
I'm like,
vibes.
let's start the month off with what's going on in the city. Tell us about some of the things that you know and are hearing about out there.
Yeah, so I'd love to share a couple of places that have unfortunately recently vanished. The first I'll talk about is a place in Ballard, a longstanding Chinese American restaurant and lounge called Golden City. It opened in 1988, and it's kind of affectionately called Golden Shitty because, it's kind of, older and kind of divey and run down. And I personally have a real soft spot for, your classic Chinese American lounge. I mean, all the hallmarks of a great dive bar, cheap, stiff drinks, really colorful cast of characters and regulars, super friendly people. It's been described as like one of Ballard's last true dive bars, and I got
Mm.
to. It just closed last week, I believe, and I went and stopped by a few days before that, and it did not disappoint. I think someone randomly just like invited me to a cookout within a couple minutes of talking to them. So yeah, really friendly, awesome folks. I know people are sad to see it go. Apparently, they wanted to extend a 5-year lease, and the landlord only offered them 1 year, so they're just going to have to close. And I think there's about 10 people that work at Golden City, some of them for 30 or more years.
Wow.
And yeah, I guess they're going to be out of a job after this. But a spot that a lot of people have memories of, hazy memories. That's kind of a old Seattle classic that's gone away.
There it is once again. And it's interesting because every time you're on, we hear a recurring theme here, around the landlord, right? Of these
Mhm.
spaces. It's like, do they not understand the heart? Because you can't really, I mean, you can get a new space in there, but you can't replace like what people are used to. And there's something so special about that when we think about what makes cities eclectic. What's the next space you have coming up?
Yeah, so the next spot is in Belltown, and it was recently demolished. It's the IBU Local 46 Union Hall, which is the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. This was built in 1949, I believe, and it was their headquarters. Although, folks may know that Seattle has long been a stronghold of the labor movement and labor history, especially post World War, around the turn of in like the 40s. And the IBU history, the local chapter actually goes back to 1901 when it was founded. So, just a big union hall, a lot of meetings, a lot of worker solidarity. Um, they moved their headquarters to Kent in 2004, and then it was occupied by a church, or bought by a church formerly called City Church, and then Church Home. Um, and also in 2001, the Vera Project, they got their start there, the nonprofit all
Yeah.
ages organization. And they put on shows there, a lot of legendary shows from about 2001 to 2002 in the basement. And they were very active in overturning the teen dance ordinance. And putting on those shows and kind of building that youth movement and being able to do so in that space was really, integral to that. So basically, yeah, that was demolished, I think, in late July. And there's something interesting about landmarking that churches in the state of Washington, they have to provide their consent to get a landmark. So a lot of times you'll see churches will get a demolition permit and then they'll sell it to a developer, because the minute it goes into non-religious entities' hands, someone can file for a landmark application. So that's kind of like like a loophole or a way to get around that. So when I posted about this, just got a ton of comments, both from music fans and folks who've been to shows there, but also people who worship there and found community, and people who've also been to labor organizing and labor meetings. And so supposedly that's going to become a 15-story luxury tower. So just to kind of see the way that this kind of moves through and corresponds with the history of Seattle. So yeah, kind of a bummer.
Well, another luxury tower. This is something for me where I'm just like, I mean, really, I don't know how many of those we need in the city. We are talking about affordability in the city, and that being a major space would have been could have been utilized for so many different things. And I'm sure many of us Seattleites could see something very different in that space. And also, too, I mean, like I just was saying, you can't replace certain things. There's culture and vibrancy, and you're talking about this real sense of community. And the one thing that we see with a lot of these high-rise buildings and things like that, they don't build a sense of community. They just don't. I've talked to residents inside of these spaces. They're like, you know what, we all have these luxury units, but we don't know our neighbors like that. There's no connection to the people that are in this building. Maybe there's some relationship with some of the staff if they're working with, lobby folks and they have to, get certain packages delivered. Maybe there's some communication there, but it's minimal compared to what I think a lot of our more historic spaces provided. That loss is serious to the city, Cynthia.
Yeah, I think it's a really unfortunate case where this is a space that could have and probably should have been landmarked, and it could have been repurposed, continued as community use. You also see landmark buildings that also serve multiple functions, that they're housing as well as community gathering places and centers. So it's kind of, I mean, it just seems like there's a lot of history lost there, but also an opportunity for it to continue to function as a community space that was lost as well.
Yeah, that's a double loss right there. Well, up next, I see we have Kid Valley on the list here. This is one of my childhood favorites. What's going on with that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a local classic. I was surprised to learn that for some reason I thought the Kid Valley that's close to kind of Woodland Park, Green Lake area was the first one, but this one in the kind of up from U Village is actually the first one, that really small one. It was founded in 1976, I believe. The building goes back to the 30s. It was a gas station, and then it was a Dairy Delight. I mean, I think a lot of people have memories of Kid Valley. I personally love their onion rings and their fried mushrooms. This was just this, again, a spot where a lot of people have, memories of just going with family or friends. A lot of, UW students went there. They were, I think from their official announcement, they did get bought out by Ivers, I think, in the late 80s, and they didn't seem like they changed a whole lot. But they're saying that this location would have required a rebuild or a remodel, and it wasn't something that was feasible for them. So, but luckily there's still other locations in Green Lake and Kenmore and in the stadiums, so people can still get their Kid Valley fix. And the history of the logo, the Burger Babe, which is no longer around, is very interesting. I did some digging around that, and that when they had the Burger Babe sign, they were in the process of switching that out in the 90s because it became a little controversial. And someone actually stole that sign that was in the university location, and it was kidnapped. And so they offered a reward of, I think it was like a lifetime of burger and shake and fries for whoever returned it, no questions asked. And so a group that called themselves the Maple Leaf Militia returned it in the parking lot with an apology note. So it did come back, and the sign got donated to Mohi, but then there was kind of this resurgence of the Burger Babe imagery, and there were some pageants held to be the next Burger Babe. So it just, I don't know, like kind of weird, like quirky local humor, but I love finding stuff like that when I'm looking into these places.
Well, this is what I'm talking about. I mean, you really only get that with some of those historic spaces. You don't hear about these kind of stories with these like statue buildings that get put up. And, one of the things that I think is also a huge loss is, unfortunately, a lot of the developers will just pay the fine for not actually occupying the commercial space that they build on the bottom, because it doesn't they don't want to build affordability into that space. You think about something of what, Office of Economic Development is doing to try to occupy some of these spaces, but oftentimes those buildings are not a part of that, right? So there's a lot to be said here in terms of my feelings about loss of all of this kind of eclectic cultural kind of community things that are going on. I didn't know anything about the Burger Babe, but as a young person, I mean, that was the spot to go. And you're talking about, I was like raised in the university district, like when my mom was going to
Mm-hmm.
UW. So that was the Kid
Yeah.
Valley we would frequent, right? And so it's just one of those things where I used to have, we used to have these debates about what is it Kid Valley or is it Burgermaster?
Yeah.
We go back and forth because that was what we were around, you know what I mean,
Mm-hmm.
before we came back to the Central District. So I have fond memories of that particular location. And, I do know there's one in Coulon. So, Renton is probably the closest one to me now. But, the fact that we can still enjoy the food is great. It's just what a loss also,
Mm-hmm.
too, because that specific one was historic in its own right. What's up next?
Yeah, so I like to, to balance out, the bum out stuff. I like
Yeah.
to include some, more positive news, like on the not vanishing front, for example. So Central Saloon, which is in Pioneer Square, right down the street. Some really encouraging news there, and that they're going to be sticking around for much longer. So that building goes back to, I believe, 1892, and it's been called the Central Tavern or Central Saloon, Central something since I think 1907. And the building was put up for sale. But I think there was something in the lease which gave them kind of like a first chance at buying the building if they were able to. So the longtime owner, I think he's owned it for 30 something years, and his business partner were able to purchase it. Um, and I think that the purchase price was like 2.75 million. And it's interesting because it's located in the Pioneer Square Historic Preservation District. The
Mhm.
price is more attainable. I mean, not like 3 million is anything
Yeah.
to sneeze at,
Yeah.
but it's kind of lower than what it might have fetched if it were able to be zoned for very tall height or encouraging speculation by developers. That usually fetches like a higher sales price. So they were able to buy it, and they're basically going to keep it in community as a place to continue to support the local music scene. Very historic space. Had a seminal part in metal and grunge. Nirvana played their first, I think maybe their first Seattle show there, and was discovered by Sub Pop. Then released their debut album. Bam Bam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, just you name it, just like a very historic space, but is also accessible to new and upcoming and emerging bands. So it's just nice to see that continuity of people who have been the longtime stewards of the venue are going to be able to continue that on, because as we've seen, places like Highway 99 Blues Club or other music venues around here, it's when they um, are displaced, oftentimes that means they just have to close altogether because it's so cost prohibitive and so hard to find a different space.
Yeah, yeah. These spaces, that's why they're so unique. And in my mind, I go that's another reason that they have to be preserved. So I love the unvanishing stories.
Mhm.
I love those, right? Or not vanishing stories, because for me, that there's something so special about the resilience of, these business owners who understand, like, look, we were able to pull together a capital campaign, get the money we needed to stay here, to cement, the legacies that have been really born and bred here,
Mhm.
which I just love,
Yeah.
So I always love the balance. And
Yeah.
I know but you always bring us back up.
Nice
I
to have some good
appreciate that.
news for once. Yeah.
Yeah, we appreciate that. And it looks like you have another venue to share that's on the upswing.
Yeah. So this one I kind of put in the unvanished category, and it's the Benbow Room in West Seattle in the Admiral District. And it opened in, I think, 1950 as the Admiral Benbow Inn. And it's like this nautical themed restaurant, kind of like diner and bar. It had the same ownership under Nasa Longmire for over 50 years. Um, but it was a place that became the clubhouse for the Seafair Pirates. Charlie Chong ran his city council campaign out of there. A lot of politicians hung out there. Also, musicians and artists and just everyday people. It kind of turned into, there was like a stage added in the last round of owners, so they had a lot of bands come through. So it was kind of this interesting, like pirate, like punk dive bar. I think Mudhoney filmed a music video there. So it's like apparently it's also haunted by a ghost who turns the water on in the women's bathroom. Stiff drinks, very interesting decor, salty characters, just like a lot of interesting and rich stories that kind of just come with a place that's been around for so long, and just all these like layers of history. So yeah, it did close and went through a couple iterations. It was the Vidiot Arcade Bar for a couple years, and then recently reopened in July under the ownership of Brian Rossick and Mark Fuller, who also own some other kind of West Seattle bars and restaurants and institutions in the area, and just seems very interested in kind of maintaining these neighborhood landmarks. Yeah, so they still have a lot of cool nautical themed stuff, pull tabs and nachos and hot dogs, and they've also yeah, they've got kind of a cool like musical program too, where they bring in DJs for different days of the week, from soul to yacht rock, to just you name it. So it's a cool space. I encourage folks to check it out. It's nice to see again like the continuity of this long time establishment for future generations to enjoy.
That's what it takes though too sometimes, right? It's like people that have the resources and the means to understand the importance of these spaces to keep them thriving, right? The fact that, okay, it was gone, you went through these different iterations, but there was this longing for what once was, right? I love those kind of stories because honestly, they are a great reminder of why these spaces are so important, and what we can do anytime we can do something to bring something back with full throttle, and allowing these spaces to continue, and building community is so important. I always appreciate your connection to the ground. So much history too in all of these spaces that you share every time you come on. And I learned something, and it's a great thing for me because even as a born and bred here in Seattle, there's a lot I just don't know about some of these cool spaces. And sometimes you may frequent spaces and not understand the history of them. You know what it means to you, right? And like your friend group or your community, oh man, we go to this space. This has been the power hub for us, right? Those kind of things. But as spaces shut down, sometimes those memories get lost and wash away with it. Right. So I love that this space was able to come back full throttle. Yeah. And thank you always for all the spaces that you're sharing with us, and for taking us, a little bit. We have to talk about what's vanishing because it's real. It's happening all over the city and really all over the nation. We're seeing this in so many other states, right? We're all kind of going through these similar things. But the fact that we also have this resilience to hold on to some of our spaces with that upswing, I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Trae. Yeah, I just appreciate you, inviting me on to nerd out about this stuff. I mean, that's my favorite part too, is getting to learn about these places that are vanishing and still around. And there's just, like I said, so much rich history and layers. And so it's just, thank you for inviting me on so we can, share it with folks, because there's a lot there.
That's right. We got to dive into these dives and all these other spaces. Like, and every time we end and we're like, where are we going? When are we going to go somewhere? But I'm always down. You got my number. We'll make it happen. Make sure you look right there and let folks know how they can find you.
Yeah, so feel free to hit me up at Vanishing Seattle on Instagram and Facebook. I get a lot of great information, tips, stories, pictures from y'all out there in the city and the community. I definitely welcome that. So yeah, just find me at Vanishing Seattle on the socials.
There it is. Vanishing Seattle in the building. Thank you so much for your work and for keeping us informed right here on The Day with Trae, so we don't miss out on some of these spaces that we can frequent either before they're closing or as they reopen. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Trae.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, you guys. It's always a great